So I was petting the cat, and I just rubbed my eyes, and I'm having an allergic reaction. So I'm going to go wash my face. While Patrick is also gone. So I will be right back. Wow, my eyes are kind of swelling. Bye. Be right back. Oh.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heilar.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick. Chapter 5, A Different Dance. And our symbol is Matt's die. Or I guess the die. I shouldn't call them his, really.
This is, again, one of those wonderful double entendre titles that Jordan likes to throw at us. Because the dance is both the dance with the girl and the dance of the battle. And this is sort of a different dance. It's definitely a dance with the girl, but it's all the strategy that he's putting together for the dance.
Mm-hmm.
Although I do think the symbol of this one should have been the horn, because we get to meet the horn sounder in this episode.
Oh, it could have been. And there's a lot of references to it as well in this chapter.
There absolutely are. I love that he's like, God, I have to figure out what to do with the horn. Hey, Oliver, what's up? It's like, oh, damn, Jordan. That's what I call just putting two events together that, like, in hindsight are completely obvious.
And doesn't he even, right? He meets Oliver and he walks away to do his rounds and he walks by an inn called the Silver Horn and he's like, ugh, he rolls his eyes or something. Totally. It's like, it's right there, man.
And I 100% believe that Jordan introduced Oliver to be the replacement for Matt as the horn sounder, right? Because at this point, he's done the, to die and live again prophecy. He knows that Matt's going to die and live again. He did that. We did that at the end of the last book,
mm-hmm.
Fires of Heaven. So he knows that the bond to the horn is broken, which means he has to introduce a new character to blow the horn. So I absolutely think that Oliver was entirely introduced to be the next horn sounder. So, yes.
I like
to
it.
answer your question. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really feel like Oliver is there as a bit of a foil for Matt. That creates a lot of humor throughout the rest of the series. But also, I don't really have much of a leg to stand on, but in this scene, I believe Oliver is trying to steal that man's horse. Because at some point we hear like, oh, the boy was touching the horse, and so this guy got all upset, and Matt's like, that's bullshit, like, boy touched a horse, like, stop that. But later we find out Oliver was sitting on the horse. And it seems to progress a little, and then, yeah.
I like your idea. I disagree with you. I do think that Oliver just wanted to
sit on the horse.
Sit on the horse because he loves horses. That's the whole bond that him and Matt have, right? Is Matt's like, who's this kid? He sees hundreds of little dirty Kyrianan kids. But when he's like, that could have been a stead, he's like, no, it's a gelding. He's like, dude, how did you know that? You like horses too.
Yeah,
and there's that immediate bond. Yeah. So that to me really is it. He's not on that horse because he wants to steal it. He's on that horse because he loves horses. And that's all there is to it.
I want him to be trying to steal it, so I'll just say that. Anyway, I'll do this read here. The Golden Stag lived up to its name in most ways. Polished tables and benches with rose-carved legs dotted the large common room. One white-aproned serving girl did nothing but sweep the white stone floor. Blue and gold scrollwork made a broad painted band on the plaster walls just below the high-beamed ceiling. The fireplaces were well-dressed stone, their hearths decorated with a few evergreen branches, and a stag chiseled above each lintel, supporting a wine cup and branching antlers. A tall clock with a little gilding stood on one mantel. A knot of musicians played on a small dais at the back. 2 perspiring men in their shirt sleeves with keening flutes, a pair plucking 9-string bitterns, and a red-faced woman in a blue-striped dress working at tiny wooden hammers across a dulcimer on thin legs. More than a dozen serving maids scurried in and out, stepping quickly in their aprons and pale blue dresses. Most were pretty, though some carried nearly as many years as Mistress Dalevin, the round little innkeeper with her wispy grey bun at the nape of her neck, Just the sort of place Matt liked. It fairly oozed comfort and an air of money. He had chosen it because it sat nearly dead center in the town, but the other had not hurt. Not everything fitted the second-best inn in Mayron, of course. The smells from the kitchen were mutton and turnips, again, and the inevitable spicy barley soup, and they mingled with the smell of dust and horses from outside. Well, food was a problem in a town jammed with refugees and soldiers, and more in camps all around it. Men's voices singing raucous marching songs came and went in the street, the sounds of boots and horses' hooves, and men cursing the heat. The common room was hot, too, without a breath of air stirring. Had the windows been swung out, dust would have soon coated everything inside, and it still would not have done much for the heat inside. Mayron was a griddle. As far as Matt could see, the whole bloody world was drying up, and he did not want to think about why. He wished he could forget the heat, forget why he was in Mayron, forget everything. His good green coat, gold embroidered on collar and cuffs, was undone, his fine linen shirt unlaced, yet he still sweated like a horse. It might have helped to remove the black silk scarf looped around his neck, but he seldom did where anyone could see. Draining the last of his wine, he set the burnished pewter cup on the table at his elbow, and picked up a broad-brimmed hat to fan himself. Whatever he drank no sooner went in than he sweated it out. When he chose to stay at the Golden Stag, the lords and officers of the band of the Red Hand followed his lead, which meant all others stayed clear. That usually did not displease Mistress Dalevin. She could have rented out every bed 5 times over, just among the lords and lordlings of the band, and that sort paid well, had few fights, and usually took them outside before spilling blood. This midday, however, only 9 or 10 men occupied the tables, and she occasionally blinked at the empty benches, patted at her bun, and sighed. She would not sell much wine before evening. A large part of her profits came from wine. The musicians played vigorously, though. A handful of lords pleased with the music. Anyone with gold deserved a "my lord," so far as they were concerned. Could be more generous than a room full of common soldiers. And that's just kind of a brief description of this little inn that Matt's staying in. I usually like to have a little more in a read-in to describe what's happening in this chapter, but that is a lot of what's happening in this chapter. Matt sitting, talking, walking. Yeah.
I mean, this is, I think I said it before, but this is quintessential Jordan. This is our characters in an inn with random encounters to advance the plot. While they have no idea what's going on and are wandering around. What is he, inspecting the troops this entire chapter? I had a question. What is he doing this chapter? Like, he's wandering around from inn to inn. What is he looking for? I didn't...
In the beginning, he's sitting around talking with Talmanis and them, and that's like the first quarter of the chapter, maybe. But his rounds, what he ends up doing is, instead of checking, whatever, he goes and he's checking in on the places where his soldiers are drinking. So basically, he's checking up on his Redarms this evening, rather than checking up on the soldiers. He wants to see that discipline is being maintained.
And he makes a point of saying that he's currently in the second best inn in Mayron, the Golden Stag. And we see later the first best inn appears to have been shut down because they let the band of the Red Hand drink too much. And he doesn't go into more than that. Yeah.
It's boarded up, and it's apparently been either burned or destroyed.
So the best inn in town is no longer functional because of Matt, which might have something to do with why the innkeeper at the inn he's at right now is so good to him.
Oh, he's probably most of the business in town, which I figure is why he gets everything he wants.
That was actually didn't seem to be the case, right? Because it seems to be that she can fill up her inn no matter what, and now that Matt's there, it's more empty than usual.
Well, we did see Matt chose that inn, and when he chose to stay at the Golden Stag, the lords and officers of the Band of the Red Hand followed his lead, which meant all others stayed clear. At first I thought that meant the, enlisted men in the band, but I think actually what Matt means there is everyone who isn't in the band.
Leah makes a decent point that maybe the reason the best inn was boarded up is not because the Band of the Red Hand trashed it, but because Matt was like, if you can't if you can't stop giving my soldiers booze, I am going to board you up.
Oh.
And they said, well, we're not going to stop. And so Matt was like, fine, I'm boarding your shop up.
Oh.
And like, you need to stop. Like,
I saw it differently. Like, Matt had it boarded up because he thought that if they kept serving his soldiers, they'd destroy the place. And it's the nicest thing in town. That's what I thought. I don't I don't know.
That's an interesting. There's a lot of ways to interpret that, and I don't know that there's any more data we get. Like, we don't hear from anybody else about why it was shut down.
He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't expand on it. He's just like,
no, it was shut down because they couldn't stop giving my soldiers booze. Now, what were the consequences of that? Was it the soldiers trashed the place? Was it because like Matt has nothing against drinking?
No, but there's certain discipline that the Redarms are enforcing. I noticed when he's going around later, another kind of throwaway thought Matt has is he notes quite clearly that he sees a lot of his soldiers like gambling, a couple of minor scuffles, like he sees us all as kind of like healthy, whatever, fraternization. But he notes that nobody seems to be very drunk, and he seems pleased by it. This must have been something that he ordered, that the Redarms are to stop, or his men shouldn't drink too much, or...
I mean, they do have to march 35 miles tomorrow, so I wouldn't want to be hungover either.
Right. If you want them to actually make it. You don't want too much in their blood, but a couple of beers before dinner, I mean, that makes me feel good on a run in the morning.
Those are the calories.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the extra calories still late in my blood there makes me feel a little better in the morning doing labor. I don't know.
I love the line, if he ever did start winning against Matt with any consistency, he would start worrying too. And I love the idea that the reason the nobles in Matt's band gamble with him is A, because they're funding the army, and they're literally giving him money to fund everybody else. But B, that they're testing his luck, right? That they're basically saying, like, as long as you're still lucky, as long as we're still losing to you, we want to follow you. Because that means that in battle, you're going to be lucky, and if you win, we win.
I'd bet on that venture, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many times can we fold this investment back into itself? Heck yeah.
And in our world, that would be so stupid. It's like, oh, you're going to follow someone who gambles well? Like, that's dumb. But this isn't our world. This is the world of the Dragon Reborn, Taviran, and the One Power, where odds are fucked and, fuck the odds, right? Like, odd things happen. Things beat the odds. And this is clearly a man that random chance favors, and there's something magical about it. And I would believe that because he is so closely adjacent to the Dragon Reborn. So, yeah, of course, like, he's got luck. He's got Taviranness. He has something indefinable that makes him more likely to win, and his soldiers know it, and they follow him because of it, even if they don't say it explicitly.
And we see that doubled down over the next page. Let's read a couple of lines. There's a bit of conversation caught his ear. Skipping. We were trying to figure out how to win some of our money back from you, Talmanas said, unsmiling from over his wine cup. No one can beat you at cards. And this is the kind of the conversation his officers are trying to devise a system to win their money back from him. And they just kind of have a good-natured conversation about it. And I feel like this is just kind of RJ doubling down here on like what you were just saying. He's kind of saying like, this is all about how Matt's unbeatable in random chance. Also in this kind of 2 or 3 page conversation between Matt and his officers.
It's all about how Talmanas' world got turned upside down.
Yeah, his officer is Talmanas. Nalsayan is here. Darid, a bunch of guys that we see over and over throughout the series. And they're explaining, I noticed, to Matt in this scene how his luck works, or what they've deduced so far. And they've deduced that it needs to be random chance. So is this maybe Darid here suggesting, or is it Nalsayan? It doesn't matter. Suggesting that they could probably recoup their money if they only bet Matt in horse races in the future. But Matt says, I don't know, I'm pretty good at that too. But it's I guess I'm also kind of wanting to say that this is an incidental explanation moment where RJ gets to explain to us how Matt's ability works through this conversation that his officers are having?
I just got distracted by doing basically a parody of Matt being the Prince of Bel-Air. In West End Door, born and raised. Milking cows is where I spend most of my days.
Milking those cows. Oh man, this works really cool. This works really well.
Chill out and relaxing all cool. Stealing some badgers outside of the school.
Shooting some longbow.
That's all shooting. Nice.
When an Aes Sedai who was up to no good started making trouble. Or I guess we could also use the Forsaken if we wanted to.
Or just Trollocs. Or Fades.
We'll work on it.
Sure. I invaded one little stone and Nynaeve got scared. You're moving in. Jesus. It works way too well. With Matt as the Prince of Bel-Air. The low-class guy who walks into a high-class life but is kind of irreverent about it. And oh man, it's perfect. See, now I kind of want Matt played by a young Will Smith. Can we get that?
I'm going to move us ahead here because I talked about Matt's conversation with his commanders here and why that's important. And then Matt starts flirting with... There's a mouthy serving girl who's kind of giving him shit. And he and this young lady called Betsy start flirting. She's giving him shit first, by the way. And she tells him to get out of the way if he wants his drink refilled or something. And he starts flirting with her, and then he asks her to dance. Betsy is working him, dude. She's...
Oh, yeah.
She knows exactly what's going on.
Totally.
Just messing with him the whole time.
There's that line where he's he wasn't sure if she was brilliant or a complete idiot. It's she's brilliant, man.
She's playing
brilliant. She's playing.
And they dance and they have a really nice time. And Matt later says oh, I'll come back later for a little more dancing. And Betsy looks at him and she's like, no. And turns and leaves.
I like her parting line is next time think of it like dancing and not like fucking, and you'll be better at it.
She knows what he means. And yes, I think that's what she's responding to. I think that's there are some cute things in their exchange too. I also kind of wanted to note at some point Betsy has all Matt's men laughing because she's kind of fast talk hustling him a little bit.
I'm a little confused about the relationship between Betsy, the owner of the inn, and Matt, and what she's encouraging Betsy to do and what she's discouraging Matt. And I realize Matt's the source of all her income, but it seems like she's making less money with Matt around. I'm very confused about how that relationship works and why Betsy is exclusively dancing with Matt and why the innkeeper approves of it. I don't understand that. And reading, it's one of those things that
I think that I know.
Okay, please tell me your theory, because I honestly, I don't understand it. And it's one of those things where, it's not that important, so I've skipped over it on every read to be I don't get this relationship, whatever, it doesn't matter. But please help me.
It isn't that important. Well, I think the first thing that happens here between Matt and Betsy is that Betsy kind of is giving Matt shit because she's probably making less money because his men have taken the place over, essentially, and no one else will be spending money there. But Matt takes a liking to her, asks her to dance. Betsy looks over at her boss, who's the inn owner, and her boss nods okay, yeah, you can dance with the customer. Later, when Matt comes back to dance again, which, by the way, she says she won't be doing any dancing later, but he comes back and tries anyway, apparently, because he does.
I think when she says I won't be doing any dancing later, she's happy to dance.
Yeah, when Matt says oh yeah, I'll come back later tonight and we'll do some more dancing, she's like, no.
No,
that's real cute that you think I don't know of what that's about.
Yeah, there ain't no horizontal tango going on tonight.
Does Daughter of the Nine Moons mean anything to you? She says no. He's like, good, let's keep dancing.
But that's how you know he really likes a girl. when he's like, wait a minute, this is someone I could marry. Started the 9 moons does, it's like you've got that test of like.
One of his men walks in the room and he says, Matt, you told me to remind you that you wanted to do your rounds at this time. And Matt says, until later, Betsy. We'll dance again when I come back. To her surprise, she waggled a finger under his nose and gave an admonitory shake of her head. That's it. And then she leaves. Also, this is a direct answer to your question earlier. He turns to Adorian and says, we'll do the drinking rooms today, he told Adorian. So he's doing a tour of, instead of his blacksmiths or his pike or something, he just goes to where the soldiers hang out that day.
One thing I want to talk about is a little bit of Betsy's speech to Matt. And I wanted to read this because I think this is where I think Jordan does an amazing job of incorporating Shakespearean language into his texts. And like when people don't praise his prose, I want to read them like this little bit, or bits like this. That sounds like it is supposed to be witty, Matt. Lordlings say witty things all the time, but you say you are not a lord. Besides, I am a simple woman. Wit goes right over my head. I think simple words are the best. Since you are not a lord, you should speak simply, or else some might think you are playing at being a lord. No woman likes a man pretending to be what he is not. Maybe you could explain what you were trying to say. And there's something about the way that is structured and the way it's very self-referential. It feels very much like maybe like Taming of the Shrew, or it just feels very Shakespearean. I'm wondering if Jordan, I'm sure he read Shakespeare. I wonder if he ever took some relationship dialogue and inspiration from the bard himself.
Probably most writers have. It would probably be hard not to.
Also, he's obviously a lord, right? Like, that's what's so amazing about Matt, is everyone sees him and sees a lord. He's obviously a lord. He has followers. He has money. He has, like here he says, I'm not a bloody lord embroidered into my jackets. And it's like the only person who can afford to have I'm not a lord embroidered into their jackets is a lord. By very definition, you're like, it's Nynaeve's, I'm going to beat some sense into these people. All they do is resort to violence. Is Matt's, I'm not a lord. I'm going to have that embroidered into my coats. How does he get that everything he does to emphasize he's not a lord makes him more lordly, more lord-like? He's lording it over, definitely.
I found the answer to your question. Or what I was looking for earlier. This is after Matt's second dance with Betsy. All the way at the end, basically. After Matt gives her a coin and is like, hey, thanks for your trouble. She studied the coin for a moment, then lifted up on her toes to kiss him lightly on the mouth, like a brush of a feather. Not a whole kiss. Note. I would never hang you whatever you did, she says to him. You will dance with me tomorrow? Before he could answer, she giggled and darted away, eyeing him over her shoulder even when she started trying to pull Adorian out to the dance area. Mistress Dalevin intercepted the pair and, shoving an apron into Betsy's hands, jerked a thumb toward the kitchens. Betsy's job was to keep Matt in that place for as long as possible. The innkeeper we saw during the first dance noted how much Matt was into Betsy and how, I think, fiery she was or whatever. The second time Matt comes back, Betsy's not serving any drinks. She's hanging out with Matt the whole time. And then when she's not hanging out with Matt anymore and Matt's like, sorry, I'm too tired to keep dancing, she gets sent to the kitchens right away.
Which is, of course, why she wanted to dance with him the entire time and wouldn't let him stop, because dancing is better than work.
I think also why she giggles, looks over her shoulder, walks away, and immediately goes to some other guy. Because that's going to make most dudes say, like, well, you know what? Maybe I'm not that tired, actually. She's trying to get him to keep dancing, because Matt also notes the girls seem really happy to dance, even though it's just as hard a work as walking around with those trays all day. But that's just the point, Matt. It's not walking with trays. That's what they do all day. And they're getting this special vacation, essentially, where their boss is like, go hang out with those rich guys. Keep them here. Keep them drinking as long as you can. Otherwise, we don't make anything.
And in my personal experience, as a terrible dancer, what Matt says is correct. You dance with them well, and they're halfway yours.
Ferengi said she's professional company, and I think that's accurate. And I also want to note, not a prostitute, because I feel like that's where most people's head goes. Not a prostitute. It's a thing, and I feel like maybe not so much in the Western world, although it's becoming more of a thing. Just paid company. An escort that doesn't go home with you. They just show you a good time, hang out with you, take you on a date. It's a real service people pay for these days.
Leah says she agrees with the statement. Dance with her once.
Or what does Matt say? Dance well with her once, and she's already halfway yours, or something.
It's one of those sayings that sort of stuck with me over time.
It's true.
But yeah, it's one of those things that I have found to be remarkably true in real life. That, and if I have any advice to anyone who's like young and trying to connect with women, learn to dance. Take some dance lessons. Do some like stupid ballroom dancing lessons. Get over it and figure out how to move your feet and your body in a way that doesn't make you seem like an idiot. And
try not to play this game too much, but better yet, ask a girl to teach you to dance.
That also helps.
I'm just going to stay there. Everybody looks dumb when they're dancing. That's the trick of it, is my understanding. Leia says,
And one of the things that I'm very jealous of Matt, and have always been very jealous of Matt, is that he gets the ability to dance just fucking inserted into his skull. It's like, oh yeah, you've been to a couple of 100 court balls.
I skipped that part of the dancing because I didn't find it to be very important, but Matt starts dancing with Betsy, and he remembers an old dance and he teaches it to her, which is part of the great fun that Betsy's having.
Mm-hmm. He's remembering a dance that happened. It's just before the Trolloc Wars, so we're thinking like 999, so 990 after breaking. You got the 10 Nations, and this is where like we get a little bit of. We've heard him talk about interacting with the Shan Chan before. Here is where he's interacted and danced with one of the Wave Mistresses. Which, putting that together with the insult, right? You remember when he comes up with that insult when he's like, "I heard that once." That's right. Yeah, you son of the Sands. In chapter 39 of Crown of Swords, so we haven't gotten there yet, where he calls her daughter of the Sands. This is actually our first reference. So yeah, that is a good point, that like this is showing his knowledge. This dance is showing that he's interacted with the Sea Folk, has danced with the Sea Folk, has knowledge of the Sea Folk, which is important later because he sees the Sea Folk vessel. So it gives him context. As
he starts dancing with Betsy, a memory comes back to him where he's a middling lord a long time ago, and he's dancing with Sea Folk Wave Mistress. Like the same rank, just 2,000 years later, walks past him, and he immediately recognizes it.
And part of why that memory comes back is because he taught the band the song that was playing at that time, right?
Oh, was it? I didn't even catch that.
That he taught the band the song.
The band that's playing in the... When you said the band, I thought the Band of the Red Hand.
No, sorry. Yeah, no.
The band in the inn.
Band.
Yeah, the song. Yeah.
And so they're playing this old song, and he hears it, and that takes him back to the time, which he didn't actually experience. And even though they're off key...
Yeah. Matt's not a musician, so he kind of whistles and hums it to get the musicians to learn it, and they do their best, but, he says it's not quite
it's not
right.
their fault. He's the one who's off, right? He's not. They're reproducing what he hummed.
Matt, claps and whistles, and he's like, come on, can't you do it?
No, we've never heard the song before. It was lost from memory 10,000 years ago. Or 1,000 years ago. I was off by an order of magnitude there.
I thought it was kind of amusing that Matt believes, at least at this point, that the other men's memories are the reason that his men follow him, which I'm sure is partly the reason, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Well, like he says, it only takes a little intellect to take that knowledge of being in 1,000 battles and turn it into a winning strategy. That's part of it. The luck is the other part, right? Like, he's got both incredibly good strategy because he's seen, and I think the I know Kung Fu thing is entirely accurate, right? Like,
yeah.
How does Neo learn Kung Fu? Well, he goes through hundreds of hours of training implanted in his brain. How does Matt learn how to be a good general? He goes through hundreds of battles implanted in his brain all at once, and it's like he's survived every single one of them.
Also in this chapter, and he just reminded me, Matt notes that he has more memories of battle than could fit in, I think he says something like the heads of 100 men. That it would be impossible for any person to ever, even dozens of people, to accrue this much direct contact and knowledge of battles. It's just people can't possibly live that long. I just wanted to note that.
Have you heard of the 10,000 hour idea?
Sure.
That to become an expert in something, you just have to do it for 10,000 hours?
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter how good you are. You just have to make sure you're, like, actively doing something for that long. That's Matt, just on, like, an accelerated scale. It's like, oh, how are you good at battle? Well, I spent 10,000 hours literally fighting battles. You know, like...
Yeah. Lifetimes. Many lifetimes, yeah.
You know, it doesn't really matter how good I fought the battles, or whether it was on the winning side or the losing side. I can take the lessons I learned and apply it to whatever situation I'm in, you know. Maybe this time, don't charge with just cavalry straight into the teeth of the pikemen, right? Like, that didn't go so well last time, right? Most people don't get to learn that a second time. You do that once, that's it. That's your lesson is you're dead.
Yeah. Matt notes that, too, at some point.
It also kind of reminds me of Battlestar Galactica, right? Like, one of the problems when they fight the Cylons is every time they shoot one down, that Cylon gets to rebirth as another ship. And so they have trouble, like, these Cylons, every time you beat one, they get smarter. They learn the lesson. They get better. You know, their pilots get more experienced every time they die instead of less.
Oh, yes. That's what I wanted to say. You just reminded me again that Matt notes at some point that he remembers as many failures as victories. And that's even possibly more important than the victories.
Absolutely. And most people can't learn from their failures because a failure is death.
Right, but he gets to benefit from thousands and thousands of failures, which, as I like to say, you can't learn without failure.
I've never failed in my life. I only succeed.
If you did it right the first time, then you didn't learn anything.
If you're not struggling,
yeah,
you're not learning.
So much of what learning is struggle. Looking for a good place to pick up Matt. We left Matt telling Adorian that he wants to go around and take a look at all the drinking rooms. At the end of this page, I did kind of want to note that Matt notes that all the Queen's Guards that Ravine fired because they were too, like, good of men, like, good loyal men, Matt's picking those men up now. A lot of them have been hired into the band, which was something I don't think I ever really noticed before.
He's got a good mix of Kyrienan, Andorman, Terran nobles and fighters. Like, he's mixed those three groups together, and he talks a little bit about how, like, they got really pissed when he was like, no, every company has the same number of people. You're not Kyrienan, you're not Andorran, you are a band of the Red Hand, and that is very much how modern militaries work.
You're not such and such a lord's men. You can't do that. Like, he notes this at the end that originally when he kind of picked up these soldiers, for lack of a better term, they were all organized under a specific monarch, or they were organized by their bloodlines or something like that, and Matt scrambled them all. So he made the units all mixed, which pissed them off. But he was surprised that they didn't leave. He wants them to integrate. Leia says nowhere else to go. That's a good point. There really isn't anywhere else to go.
And that's part of why his army is so effective, is he does force them to integrate. They're able to play off each other's strengths and weaknesses and train each other.
Another note I remember, he's trying to push his archers to use crossbows instead, and he notes that the archers are very resistant. They don't like the idea of changing their skill.
I missed that.
But he's forcing his archers to train with the crossbow.
And I think we talk about how the crossbow is a less skilled item, in that, like,
you really don't need skill to... Like, if you've ever learned how to shoot a rifle, like, point it, pull the trigger. There, now you know how to use it. You know? It's fair. Give someone a day training, and that's it.
Which is not the case with the longbow.
No.
And so what he's able to do is equip a bunch of low-skilled soldiers And as we see, that comes together with Rand recruiting soldiers for his Black Tower, which we saw in the previous chapter. Well, those soldiers end up getting sent over to Matt and Bashir, and they end up equipping them with the crossbows. That's where that idea ends up. And he ends up getting the fast crank.
Pikes and repeating crossbows. Yeah,
he ends up getting the fast crank later. But yeah, here he's always looking for a way to make them faster and shoot faster. You know, it's not necessarily how accurate you are, it's how many arrows you can put in the air at the same time when you're taking out hordes of Trollocs, right? Like, you just need to be able to shoot arrows into the horde. Accuracy isn't so important. You just need volume.
Yeah, and at a pretty close distance, yeah.
The thing that's cool about crossbows is they can store up a lot more energy than you can hold in your arms. So, like, a longbow and a long arrow can only hold as much strength as you have in your body. Amplified, sure, right, by leverage and that sort of thing. But a crossbow can hold so much more power. And that's why it punches through chest plates and stuff like that.
I was looking at some modern ones online recently, and the draw strength on some of them is insane. As someone who's only ever shot stick bows, I've shot a crossbow once or twice when a friend handed me one to see what it feels like, but, the draw weight's in like the 300 pounds and stuff, like something no normal person could ever move with an arm. Crazy, like that could punch through cars. Some of these bolts, it's nuts.
When unlike a bullet, who mostly relies on velocity, it's a small mass at a high velocity. Arrows actually have a fair amount of mass, and so if you get them going, they can punch through a lot of stuff.
I was just kind of glad RJ included the repeater crank in this book. I felt like it's a cool part of history not a lot of people know about. Machine gun crossbows. It's a real thing.
He does a really good job of showing technological advancement in a very narrow, in sort of a pre-industrial era. It's one of my favorite parts of the Wheel of Time is Rand's schools and Matt's warfare. What drives technology forward?
Desperation.
Warfare, schools, and porn. But that's a whole other. He doesn't show many examples of that in the book. But men's true desires, humanity's true desires.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Rainbow D, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Is like this is such a beautiful example of how like you can have a relatively stagnant technological level, and then you hit warfare or Cold War in our case, and all of a sudden all your effort is in beating the other guy, and that can produce huge amounts of transformational technology. Like no one is going to doubt that after World War II, that's what established our modern world of technology. War is what led to our modern lifestyle.
Yeah, gosh, for a lot of different reasons, but also it's pretty rare that the government will put most of its money into scientific development of, whatever. Just give scientists money and be like, figure stuff out. Do new things, interesting experiments, come up with new materials, build a bomb that can level a city.
It's one of the things that's very frustrating to me that people are willing to unite behind something like war, but not
Peace.
Similar scientific. Yeah.
If people aren't afraid, it's really difficult to get them together and to do or work on anything together.
Fear is ridiculously good as a motivator.
That's a good point, Leia. Even the space race was about fear.
It's about being afraid the Russians were going to get there first.
Not because it is easy, but because it is hard.
And because the Russians want to do it too. Spite. The space race is entirely about spite. Anything you can do, I can do better.
Held this in my head for the last minute, but there's it's definitely a joke about who can pee further.
I can do anything better than you. Exactly. Yeah. What do you want to bet one of the restaurants dumped some piss on the moon? It was like, yeah, I can piss on the fucking moon.
Oh, yeah? In
mine.
Orbit. Oh, yeah? In the moon. It's basically what? There's no reason. There's like...
Meanwhile, that one engineer that pissed in a vial on Voyager is like, yeah, my shit's all the way out there. I am out of the goddamn solar system. Yeah.
He probably told his grandkids about it.
No one's pissed further than me. Yeah. I pissed on Voyager. Yeah, it's cool. My DNA is outside of the solar system. I don't know about you.
I'm going to bring us back here because it's been a while.
We get multiple references to the black-hafted spear. You know, we get a little bit of recap, right? This is definitely a recap chapter where Matt is in his own head sort of giving us his story. But one of the things he brings up a lot, and I notice in hindsight, is how much he always talks about the two things he got from the Finn, right? He got the Terran Real and the knowledge. Oh, and also they gave him the spear. But he's always very careful never to associate the spear with the final wish, which is a way out of it.
A way out.
Yeah. And I that to me was one of the most brilliant reveals of foreshadowing that Jordan ever gave us, because he gave us the 3 wishes and he gave us the 3 items, and no one ever said, "Oh, is the 3rd item the 3rd wish?" Duh, the 3rd item is a way out. Such a brilliant reveal. And looking at this chapter, he's rubbing it in our faces. Settling his hat on his head, he took up his black-hafted spear from beside the door. That was another gift from the other side of the Terran Real, with its inscription on the shaft of the old tongue, and its odd head like a short spear blade marked with 2 ravens. And that's after he's just given us the 3 wishes, like in a previous paragraph. So yeah, I know. It's one of those points where I think Jordan his foreshadowing really is brilliant. And the spear, I think, is one of the best examples of that. When he cut his way out of the Tower of Genjai with that spear, it blew me away. That was really like...
Me too. That's one of those moments I'll never forget. It's a key!
It's a key! Of course it's a fucking key! And like years, decades of my life, I had been wondering about that thing. And the fact that I never realized it was a key. Like, of course, that's what he wished for, a way out. But I always thought that the way out is what they had done when they dropped him outside the gateway. They did that on their own. They also gave him a way out, which was the spear.
I feel like it's really easy in that situation to not think about the spear, because I always kind of thought of like, oh, yeah, they gave him a way out. Death. Death is the way out. But why they didn't have to give him the spear to hang him from the tree, did they? You just don't think of that.
And because the spear was what he was hanging from, right? Like, it was literally, because it was between 2 branches, and then the rope was tied to the spear. He was hanging from the spear. So, like, oh, they used the spear to hang him, so therefore the way out was death. And it all links back together. The way out is death. Death was the spear. Spear is what he was hanging from. It's, so good. So good. So good. I have no more to say about that, other than to be like, this is why I love Robert Jordan. This is why I reread these books over and over and over and over again, is because of details like that and details like this. Now I'm done. The next section, it looks like just a list of inns that he's going between, and I had very little to say about that. I was careful to go through any background highlights that I wanted to pick up, really, and there's not much. You know, something we didn't bring up that I kind of wanted to note and highlighted a couple of times in this chapter, that when Betsy first starts talking to Matt, she notices his scarf, starts toying with it, notices a scar underneath, and says, whoa, that's a scar from hanging. Maybe, or she says something like, maybe you got hung because you knew too much, like happens to those Terran lords. And Matt's actually like, I got hung because I didn't know anything. It was a lack of knowledge that got me hung. And for me, again, when I talk about Shakespearean language, that line in particular jumps out at me. Let's see if I can find it.
Hanged for knowledge and for a lack of it?
Yeah. And of course, when we talk about Matt as Odin, right? Hung from the tree of knowledge, right? That is absolutely a phrase that we associate with Odin over and over and over and over again. And it's one of the things that makes Matt such an obvious Odin analogy, is the fact that he was hung from the tree of knowledge.
And given knowledge. That was part of his payment.
Absolutely. Again, quintessential, this is Matt as Odin. This is, when I say quintessential Matt, quintessential Jordan, like, to me, this chapter has so much that encapsulates everything that is Matt in my head. The inns, the dancing, the I'm not a lord, the band of the red hand, the songs, the Jack of the Shadows, the spear, Oliver, like, this is a Matt chapter with a capital M. And I don't know how else to say it. Like, this is, because there's Dagger Matt, and I don't really think of that as Matt. That's whiny Matt. And there's Sanderson Matt, which is a whole different immature Matt that we'll talk about when we get there. But this, and there's some Ebu Dar stuff that I really think is quintessential Matt, right? Like, I really do think him and Tylan and Tuon and that whole era is like, I love that Matt era.
Me too. He understands himself at that point too, which is satisfying to read. Yeah,
totally. But this is sort of this is the beginning of that Matt. This is really him coming into himself, understanding his own memories, realizing that he needs the band around him to protect him from the Forsaken, and basically from here on out, he is the Matt we know and love. And I don't know, I'm in love with this chapter. It's such a good chapter.
I'm nodding.
Like, if people who love Matt should like, this chapter is the quintessential Matt.
I liked this little part here. As Matt's doing his rounds, this is in the beginning. The soldiers recognized Matt right away, of course, and many raised cheers, even men too far away to see more than his broad-brimmed hat, an odd spear. Those picked him out as clearly as any noble sigil. He had heard all the rumors about why he disdained armor and helmet. There were all sorts, from mad bravery to the claim that the only weapon that could kill Matt had to be forged by the Dark One himself. Some said the hat had been given to him by Aes Sedai, and as long as he wore it, nothing could kill him. The fact was, it was an ordinary hat, and he wore it because it gave good shade, and because it was a good reminder to stay clear of anywhere he might need helmet and armor. The tale circulating about his spear, with that inscription that few even among the nobles could read, were more extravagant still. None could match the truth, though. That raven-marked blade had been made by Aes Sedai during the War of Shadow, before the breaking. It never needed sharpening, and he doubted he could break it if he tried. I liked the rumors. Leia, I did have that highlighted, because that's actually a really good note about Matt's character and his ability as a leader, that he thinks to have soap, or, some kind of sanitizing product distributed to all the refugees who are starving in the streets right now. This is, Rand showed up, it was the night before, or a few nights before? I forget exactly. But Rand gatewayed right into Matt's bedroom. Rude. And just starts talking to him, like, in the middle of the night.
I think it's literally, like, the night before, because he says, there's a rumor that Lord Dragon was in town yesterday, and it's only off by half a day. So I'm guessing it was literally, like, the night before.
That's right. And this is Matt's talking to Adorian, and Adorian's asking, like, when are we leaving? I've heard rumors. And he's asking some pretty sharp, pointed questions, and Matt knows, like, he's the clever one, and it's too bad that his house isn't as high as this other guy's house, because I'd have him in charge if I could. Adorian's the one that Matt actually likes.
And this is one of those guys who was hanging out with Matt when the first bubble of evil happened.
Yeah.
And remember we talked about those nobles in... So, yeah, the Terran nobles who witnessed the bubble of evil when the playing cards came alive. Which I've always speculated is the Band of the Red Hand origin, because he gets stabbed in the hand, and it's bleeding, and he leaves, like, a red handprint. And those are the guys who later become... And so, I mean, I know it's based on the old... the stories of the Manetheren guard, but... And he tells that story, but I have to wonder if maybe getting stabbed in the hand and having a bloody hand didn't contribute to that.
It's at least a foreshadowing.
Right.
That all of the men in that room, I think one dies, and all of the others end up Matt's officers later. Tadosian, Adorian, there's one or two more.
Adorian.
Yeah.
Talmanis, I think. Yeah. By the way, Jordan, when he describes people, he's like, oh yeah, this dude's ugly. He's got a big nose, or a potato nose. Like, apparently having a big nose is the ugliest thing you can have in this world.
Well, I mean, if it's shaped like a potato. Someone pointed this out to me recently, and I had never really been using this trick, but RJ gave us little tricks with the names. So like Talmanos is Kyrianen because it ends in an ANES. Or, so his surname will end in, similarly to Moraines. And the Terrans, I think, are IAN or something like that, because it's, what is it? Idorian, Tidosian.
The city we're in is Marion.
Yeah, there's little tricks in there. Talmanos isn't the surname. Talmanos.
It's his last name. I don't know what his first name is.
Delavind is his surname.
Like I've ever heard that before.
But Ind.
Yeah. So, again, the only thing I really have is with with Rand's visit, is just how crazy he is. And his little comments about no man should have another man's voice in his head, and how, we see Matt interpret that as like, wait, does he know I have other...
Does he know I have voices in my head?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of the most interesting part of that.
And it's one of the ways where I really do think Jordan is trying to compare and contrast. Both Rand and Matt have other men's memories in their heads. Rand is the only one who's going insane because of it. And the reason is not because of the voices, it's because of the taint.
And to be honest, the more I'm thinking about it, it really seems to me here that Rand shows up and rants at Matt and then leaves. What is the point of this? There's nothing here that Matt doesn't know. And even Rand shows up and says, "Make haste slowly, Matt," Rand says. "He has to see it coming. Everything depends on it." Seated on his bed, Matt jerked his boot the rest of the way off and dropped it on the scrap of the rug Mistress Delvin had given him. "I know," he said sourly, pausing to rub an ankle he had cracked on a bedpost. "I helped make the bloody plan. Remember?" And like he's... Why are you telling me my own directions to you?
No, and like, just how insane is it that he popped in his room, literally risking his life, right? Like, he could have killed him with that gateway if he wasn't in bed. Yeah. Just to say, hey, don't forget the thing we talked about.
And then, of course, and Matt says that. He says, "I helped make the bloody plan, remember?" And Rand says, "How do you know you're in love with a woman, Matt?" And Matt's like, "What the fuck is wrong with you, dude? Like, are you on something?" Like,
yeah. Smoke less.
Holy
one power.
Hell, man. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Have a beer and lay down. Like, go to bed. I don't know what's wrong with you right now.
And little stuff like, and there's knowledge that only LTT could have, right? Samael only thinks in straight lines. How could Matt know that? How could Rand know that? He doesn't. That's an LTT knowledge slipping through.
Which,
and it's constant. Yeah.
Matt thinks of as more crazy, because how could Rand possibly know that? Of course he does, but
and of course Matt's like, "Rand, why are you asking me about women? You know more about women than I do. You and Perrin, you're better with women." So once again, that trope that we bring up over and over and over again, right? The other two boys are always better with women than whatever boy's head we're in.
I love that trope.
We hear it again.
Series.
It's pretty fun. At the same time, it's like, dude.
When Rand says, "How do you know if you're in love with a woman?" Matt blinks at him. Says, "How in the pit of doom should I know? That's one snare I've never put a foot in."
He hasn't met the Daughter of the Nine Moons yet. Leia makes a good point that Rand is probably pretty lonely. I've talked about this a couple of times, that he's losing a lot of his close companions. A lot of his friends are going away. He's avoiding Avienda, and really Matt's the only Two Rivers person who's anywhere near him these days.
Yeah.
At least he's working with Matt, right?
He doesn't have Lan either, which I feel like was a anchor for him before. A man he felt like he could trust and go to with problems, and, now Rand doesn't really trust anyone. I mean, he trusts the clan chiefs to do their jobs, but he's never really close with them. I wouldn't call them friendships. At least not until later.
Yeah, I mean, there's different kinds of friendships, right? There's a difference between a friendship of someone you have known since you were a child and grown up with versus someone you met last year and are fighting a war with. They're both absolutely can be close, but there's a certain level of trust that I feel like that Rand has for the people he grew up with that he can never get for the people he's met since he's left the Two Rivers, right? Like, once you have power, can you really trust the people around you to be your friends?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're right. Only the people that still continue to not take you seriously, you know? Like, you can trust Nynaeve if you become powerful. You know? Like, she'll still try to spank you. She'll pull you right off your throne.
or Avienda that fucking hates you and wants nothing to do with you, right? The people who see him as people, that's why he falls in love with them.
Yeah. I never extended the logic that far, but that was always the way I saw his relationship with Min.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I never extended the logic that far. But Min is always like...
All three?
Yeah.
And he talks
Quiet down
about
over there,
that.
you dumb shepherd. And he loves it. Or it just makes... I think it makes him feel it was a better way to say it.
He talks about that explicitly with Avienda. He doesn't so much say it with Elaine, because with Elaine, since she's a queen, she's already kind of on... He's, like, trying to get up to her level, not the other way around, right? And then, like, once he's the Dragon Reborn, she's like, oh yeah, you're one of my society anyway. So, like, I've always found the relationship with Elaine to be the least satisfying of the three. It's the most, like, love at first sight that I find infuriating in fantasy.
You know, I just feel like Elaine's not for me. And, Miranda, if you're super into it, go for it, dude. But I never liked her very much. I don't know. Just personally.
Sure. The Elaine relationship always felt like a state sort of marriage, right? Like, she's the most powerful ruler. He's the Dragon Reborn.
The dragon and the queen, yeah. I always felt that too. Like, that seemed like a good political marriage, but I never really understood what was between them.
Let's go back to the introduction of Oliver, which I want to make a point in saying his name is not Oliver, which is something I got wrong my entire first couple hundred reads. It's Oliver. There's no I in his name. It's Oliver, not Oliver. Which, honestly, until I played Just Roll With It with Fate, and he made his squire named Oliver, and I kept calling him Oliver, and he's like, why do you call him Oliver? I'm like, that's the kid's name in the book. And he's like, no, it's Oliver.
It's Oliver.
And I was like, no, it's not. And I had to literally go back about, 2 years into this podcast and to get his name correct. I'd always put an I in there. My mind saw an I. I swear to God.
It's a really subtle difference. If you hear someone say Oliver, it sounds just like Oliver. It's really not that different.
It's Berenstein versus Berenstein Bears. I swear to God, I got transported into an alternate universe where his name is Oliver, not Oliver. He touched me horse, the man snapped in a Median accent, shaking off Matt's hand. Median boasted that they had the worst tempers of anyone in Murundi. I'll break his skinny peasant neck for him. I'll wring his scrawny... Without another word, Matt brought the butt of his spear up hard, straight between the fellow's legs. The Mirandian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes rolled up till almost nothing showed but white. The boy darted off as the man's legs folded, depositing him on knees and face in the street. No, you won't, Matt said.
And these apparently wealthy men have a boy runs up to them and he's like, "My lords, are you dead?" So they're like on the ground bleeding, and he begs Matt to not kill them. And I have this read with Oliver here. "I'm not going to kill anybody," Matt cut in, disgusted. "But you get these heroes on their horses and out of Mayron by sunset. I don't like grown men who threaten to break a child's neck." Sunset! "But, me lord, they're injured. He's only a peasant boy, and he was molesting the pair's horse." "I was only sitting on it," the boy burst out. "I was not what you said." Matt nodded grimly. "Boys don't get their necks broken for sitting on a horse, Padre, not even peasant boys. You get those two gone, or I'll see about breaking their necks." He motioned to Harnan, who nodded sharply to the other Redarms. File leaders never did anything themselves, any more than Bannerman did, who snatched pears and Cullen up roughly, and hustled them away, groaning with Padre trailing behind, wringing his hands, and protesting that his masters were in no condition to ride, that they were hunters of the horn, and heroes, Dorian still held the source of all this bother by an arm, Matt realized. The Redarms were gone, and the townsfolk drifting away. No one glanced twice at the boy. They had their own children to look after, and hard enough time doing that. Matt exhaled heavily. Don't you realize you could be hurt just sitting on a strange horse, boy? A man like that probably rides a stallion that could trample a little boy into the bottom of his stall, so no one could ever tell you were there. A gelding. The boy gave another jerk at Dorian's grip, finding it had not loosened, put on a sulky face. It was a gelding, and it would not have hurt me. Horses like me. I am not a little boy. I am 9, and my name is Oliver, not boy. Oliver, is it? 9. He might be. Matt had trouble telling, especially with Kyrianan children. Well, Oliver, where are your mother and father? He looked around, but the refugees he saw passed by as quickly as the townfolk. Where are they, Oliver? I have to get you back to them. Instead of answering, Oliver bit his lip. A tear trickled from one eye, and he scrubbed it away angrily. The Aiel killed my papa, one of those shadow. Mama said we were going to Andor. She said we were going to live on a farm, with horses. Where is she now? Matt asked softly. She got sick. I buried her where there are some flowers.
How old do you think Oliver really is? Because Matt sees him and says, he was perhaps the ugliest.
I think he's probably lying.
I don't think he is. I think he
really
is 9, yeah. I think Matt's just terrible. Because, like, kids are so fucking proud of their age.
Yeah, they are. But I think Oliver's lying for 2 reasons. And I think Matt has no idea of what he's talking about for other reasons. I think Oliver would lie because little boys always want to be older. And second of all, I'm unconvinced that Oliver might know how old that he is. If he is younger than 9, and that's how old he was when the Kyrianan Civil War broke out, then he's walked across half a continent in that time, and he probably hasn't gotten very much to eat, which I believe is the reason why Matt believes that he can't tell Kyrianan children's ages, particularly Kyrianan, not others. Why? Because they're starved.
But they're also genetically very small people.
That's what they say.
Yeah, I mean, like, Moiraine's tiny, like, the Kyrianans are very small, and they have small children, and small, starved children, right? Like, if Matt looks at a kid and is like, oh, yeah, he's like, oh, that's a 6-year-old, and you're like, well, yeah, it's a 6-year-old or a small, starved 9-year-old.
Right.
And so I think Oliver's right, that Matt's wrong when he says, oh, it looks like a 6-year-old, and Oliver's right when he says, oh, I'm 9. And his mother only died recently. Like, what 9-year-old doesn't know they're 9? Right? Like, even at 4, kids are like, I'm 4 years old. You know, they do that whole thing where they like...
Sure.
So, like, a 9-year-old or even a 6-year-old is going to know how old they are. And a 6-year-old isn't going to be duplicitous enough to, like, oh, I'm going to add a couple of years to my age.
Really? You've never seen a kid lie about nothing for no reason?
Yeah, I could be wrong about that one. That's you're right.
But I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, I only thought that Oliver might fluff his age out because it just seemed like a thing a little boy might do. It would be like, I'm old. I'm 9. And that's impressive, right? Well, I don't know if anyone agrees, but I did see that as over the last year, these kids probably haven't eaten very much. So if you're looking at, you might think that's a 6-year-old, but it's a 9-year-old because in that time, in the last 2 years, those kids might have grown, and instead they didn't.
And I want to say this to start off with. I'll say it many times, but the bad influence on Oliver is always Matt. It's never the uncles. It's always Matt. Oliver loves Matt. He emulates every single one of his behaviors, bad and good. And so Matt sees his own reflection in Oliver. He just doesn't want to admit it. But yeah, this is where you get the line where Matt says, I'm not a lord. He was going to start having, I'm not a bloody lord, embroidered on his coats. And it's like, I love that. Only, literally, embroidery. You're going to use embroidery to say you're not a lord. It's...
I felt the same way, Leia. I was just guessing. I didn't mean to say Oliver is definitely, this or that age. Just that. It seemed likely he'd lie.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe he's like 15.
Could be. Unlikely, but And you're right. I kind of, now that I really think about that, why would RJ have Oliver lie for months, It just isn't important. But IRL, I would expect a little boy to lie. I think probably a little more like, somewhere around 9, but somewhere between like 9 to 12 or 13 or so, I would think is really when kids get to a age of reason, I guess, would be a way to call it. But get to an age where you can do something that should be done, although you've never done it before yourself. Whereas like little kids can't really do that. They can't do something they haven't done before. But adults can totally do that. Like bury a person. You can come up with the steps, yourself. You can figure that out.
All right, sorry, I'm having a bit of a allergic reaction right now. I will.
Oh yeah?
I don't know if I petted the cat. I don't know.
I was going to say, did you hug someone with a cat?
I'll be right back. I'm having some major issues.
Oh, I saw that. I just thought you were tired or something. Take your time. Seth has a pretty good allergy, guys. I don't know if you guys knew that, but cats can blind him, essentially, over a short period of time. So, yeah, he likes them, but I think every once in a while he gets a little cat hair in the eye or something, and Oh, I saw him rubbing his eyes, but yeah, just as he walked away, I was like saying that. He probably rubbed a little cat dander into his eye. He'll be all right in a second, but I don't know. I have wondered why he would pick that name. Why Oliver? Or yeah, why would he pick Oliver? Also an orphan. That's pretty good. Yeah, really, really close. And I feel like when RJ does that, he's usually doing it on purpose. Yeah, for sure. Because I can think of a few other examples of names that are really close to names from real life in some way. So like Arthur, Hawkwing, King Arthur. Sure. Some of the other here, Oliver's a good example of that I never really thought about that. But Oliver, yeah, as an orphan. Possibly the most famous orphan, yeah. The other example that stands out in my head is at some point, I forget whose perspective we're in at that point, but someone's listing the names of the heroes that are connected to the Horn, and someone says Padraig, which is the Irish version of Patrick. It's like Padraig or something like that. And that's a real name in real life. And of course I remember that because it's related to my own name, But there's probably a few other examples, I think, and I think you're right though. I think RJ's trying to summon when he does that. He's trying to summon that other person.
Could I have some more, please, sir? You want another horse? More horse? Yeah, definitely. I got to have a cuppa or two.
Cuppa was a term I only became familiar with recently.
Yeah, go for it. I don't think I have a lot to say before the readout. Sorry, and to be honest, my eyes are so... I can't even see the page anymore. My eyes just went...
I can tell that you can't see, but it doesn't matter.
I can't see anything. It's really... I can't read right now.
I can tell by looking at your eyes that you can't see.
Oh, God.
Or at least you can't see well. That's a good point, Leia. The Sea Folk showed their face in this chapter. We didn't really talk about them or what their role is or what they're doing right now, which is, of course, talking about their Kuramor, but my partner's having a terrible allergic reaction right now, so I don't know if this conversation is going to happen. We should we should let him cry for a little bit. Yeah.
The Kuramor, yeah, they're looking for the Kuramor. I didn't have a lot to say other than that, then they're looking for Rand. Yeah. And that's why they're in an unusual place.
I'm going to do my readout here, which I warned you guys in the beginning is very long. I'll just say, Matt's hanging out with his officers. They're like getting hammered. They're all dancing with the serving girls at this point. It's like 2:00 in the morning. No one else is there. It's just them and all the serving staff, and they're partying and having a good time. And Matt decides he's getting real tired and drunk, and he tips the girl that I think he's well aware was assigned to hang out with him all night, and and goes to bed, or is about to go to bed, but he leans across the table and says to his officers who are real drunk right now, The band moves south at first light. You best start making preparations. The three men gaped at him. That is only a few hours, Telmanis protested at the same time as Nelsayan said, It will take that long just to root them out of the drinking rooms. Wincing, Darrett shook his head. None of us will get any sleep tonight. I will, Matt said. One of you wake me in 2 hours. First light, we're marching. Which was how he found himself astride Pips, his sturdy brown gelding, in the grey pre-dawn with his spear across his saddle and his unstrung longbow shoved beneath his saddle girth, with not enough sleep and an ache behind his eyes, watching the band of the Red Hand leave Meron, all 6,000 of them, half horse, half foot, and all making enough noise to rouse the dead. Despite the hour, people lined the streets and hung gawking from every upper window. I wanted to note also while I was reading this that in the beginning of this chapter, Matt says not quite 6,000. At the end of this chapter, Matt says all 6,000 of them. The band's square red-fringed banner led the way, a red hand on white. The band's motto, crimson embroidered below, Doviandi, Setovia, Sagain. It's time to toss the dice. Nelsayan, Darrett, and Telmanis rode with the flag, 10 mounted men pounding away at brass kettle drums, hung with scarlet skirting, and as many trumpeters, adding flourishes. Behind came Nelsayan's horsemen, a mixture of Terran armsmen and defenders of the stone, Kyrianan lordlings with Khan on their back and retainers at their heels, and a sprinkling of Andorrans, each squadron and troop with its own long banner, bearing the red hand, a sword, and a number. Matt had had them draw lots for who got which number. The mixing had caused some grumbling, more than a little, truth to tell. In the beginning, Kyrian and Horus all followed Telmanis, and Terrans Nelsayan. The foot had been a mongrel lot from the start. There had been mutters about making each unit the same size, too, and numbers on the pennants. Lords and captains had always gathered as many men as would follow, who were known as Adorian's men, or Marisin's men, or Alejandrins. They still did some of that. For example, Adorian's 500 called themselves Adorian's Hammers, not Squadron 1. But Matt had driven it into their heads that every man belonged to the band, not whatever land he had happened to be born in, and any who did not like doing things his way were free to leave. The remarkable thing was, none had. Why they stayed was hard to understand. Certainly, they won when he led them, but some still died. He had a difficult time keeping them fed and seeing they got their pay more or less on time, and they might as well forget the wealth they boasted they were going to loot. Nobody had seen one coin of it so far, and he did not see much chance they ever would. It was madness. The first squadron raised a cheer, quickly taken up by the 4th and 5th. Carloman's leopards, and Raymond's eagles, they called themselves. Lord Matrim and victory! Lord Matrim and victory! If Matt had had a rock handy, he would have thrown it at them. The infantry came next in a flowing snake, each company behind a drum-beating cadence, as well as one of the long pennants, theirs with a pike instead of a sword across the hand. 20 ranks bristling with pikes, followed by 5 of archers or crossbowmen. Each company had a flute or two as well, and they sang to the music. We drink all night and dance all day, and on the girls we'll spend our pay, and when we're done then we'll away to dance with Jack of the Shadows. Matt waited out the song until the first of Telmanis' cavalry appeared, then dug his heels into Pip's flanks. No need to attend the supply wagons at the tail end, or strings of remounts. Horses would go lame between here and Tyr, or die from things the farriers could not remedy, and a cavalryman without a horse was not worth much. On the river, 7 small ships crept downstream under triangular sails, little faster than the current. Each carried a small white flag with the red hand. Other craft were setting forth too, some sprinting south under every scrap of canvas they could hold. As he caught up to the head of the column, the sun finally peaked above the horizon, sending the first rays across the rolling hills and scattered thickets. He pulled his hat low against the glare of the brilliant silver. Nelsayan had a gauntleted fist to his mouth, stifling an impressive yawn, and Darrett sat slumped in his saddle, heavy-lidded, as if he might drift off to sleep right there, only Talmanis was straight-backed, wide-eyed, and alert. Matt felt more in sympathy with Darrett. Even so, he raised his voice to be heard over the drums and trumpets. Put the scouts out as soon as we're beyond sight of the town. Both forest and open country lay farther south, but fairly well-established road cut across both. Most traffic went by water, but enough had gone on foot or wagon over the years to mark out a track. And shut that bloody noise up. The scouts? Nelsayan said wonderingly. Burn my soul, there's no one with so much as a spear inside 10 miles of us, unless you think the White Lions have stopped running. And if they have, they won't come any closer than 50 miles if they have any notion we're about. Matt ignored him. I want to make 35 miles today. When we can do 35 miles every day, we'll see how far we can push it. They gaped at him, of course. Horses could not maintain that pace for very long, and anybody but Aiel considered 25 miles an excellent day's march for foot. But he had to play this out the way it had been dealt. Comadrin wrote, "Attack on ground where your enemy believes you will not, from an unexpected direction, at an unexpected time. Defend where your enemy believes you are not, and when he believes you will run. Surprise is the key to victory, and speed is the key to surprise. For the soldier, speed is life." "Who is Comadrin?" Talmanis asked after a moment, and Matt had to gather himself to answer. "A general. Dead a long time. I read his book once." He remembered reading it, anyway, more than once. He doubted a copy existed anywhere now. For that matter, he remembered meeting Comadrin after losing a battle to him some 600 years before Arthur Hawkwing. Those memories did creep up on him. At least, he had not delivered that little speech in the old tongue. He usually managed to avoid that sort of thing now. Watching the mounted scouts fan out across the rolling river plain, Matt relaxed. His part of it was begun, according to plan. A hasty departure on short notice, as if he were trying to sneak away south, but showy enough to make sure it was noticed. The combination would make him seem a fool, and that was to the good. Teaching the band to move fast was a good idea. Moving fast could keep you away from the fighting, but their progress was sure to be noted from the river if nowhere else. He scanned the sky. No ravens or crows, but that did not mean much. No pigeons either. Yet if none had left Mayroan this morning, he would eat his saddle. In a few days, at most, Samael would learn the band was coming, hurrying, and the word Rand had put about down in Tyr would have made it clear that Matt's arrival would signal the imminent invasion of Ilion. At the best speed the band could do, it was still more than a month to Tyr. With any luck, Samael would be cracked like a louse between two rocks before Matt had ever come within 100 miles of the man. Samael could see everything coming. Almost everything. But it was going to be a different dance than he expected. Different than anyone but Rand, Matt, and Bashir expected. That was the real plan. Matt actually found himself whistling. For once, everything was going to work out. Oh gosh. For once, everything was going to work out the way he expected. LOL, Matt. LOL.
Yeah, it's not. It never does.
Nothing ever does. You should know that. You should know that by now. Mr. Cawthon?
I'm not a bloody noble. I love that he becomes a bloody noble when he marries one. It's like, I'm not a bloody noble. It's like, Matt, how do you think you become a noble? You marry one.
Right, or you kill one and take their place. I think those are the only two ways you can do that.
I mean, inheritance. I guess that technically counts as killing one and taking their place.
Well, or yeah, one dies and you take their place. One way or another. Also, Leia, I really wanted to wholeheartedly thank you for complimenting my singing. It's not something I usually like to do in public because I don't think it's any good.
You did a good job with that. The chant sing of the Jack of the Shadows. It's definitely a soldier chant, but you did a great job with it, yeah.
Talked about this on the podcast before. I fell in love with that style a million years ago. I was on a canoe trip. I don't know if I'm going to tell this story any good right now, but I was with my friend Shine, who I've mentioned a bunch of times on this podcast. Or sorry, Sandstorm was the Marine. Shine was a different guy. who sang me marine, like, cadence, like, running songs while I was rowing us down up the Shenandoah.
It's how you maintain a pace.
I loved them. I really liked them. Yeah. He started teaching them to me. Oh, Leia, I'm sure you hate those, but you actually have to sing those while you were, like, running through the desert or whatever. I don't think Sandstorm liked singing them to me very much, but I asked him to, and it was, like, the one thing he could do for me. He was not a...
The one I always remember is 1, 2, 3, 4. I love the Marine Corps.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's one of them.
You know, but I Jack of the Shadows feels very similar to me in the, like, marching song type thing. It's like you're keeping a cadence, you're trying to keep a pace.
Sure, and you sing a song. It makes you feel nice if you're walking or running.
But you don't have to, like, the song doesn't need to, like, you're not singing a song, you're chanting a song.
Yeah, and it's like more about the
breathing
rhythm.
In and breathing. Yeah, exactly.
And when you get a really big group of people to all do the same thing at the same time like that, it's a really powerful feeling if you've ever been in a group like that before.
Well, it's similar to, like, being in a stadium and, chanting something.
It's a powerful noise, but I always think of I have an experience or two when I was working with Occupy Wall Street so long ago. I remember I was at a demonstration, and this was when I was really an organizer, and I was really working to try to make these big events work. I was working, like, with staff, but I specifically remember that was when I remember, like, the riot police showed up, and then we responded, and they responded, and we responded, and I remember some moment that all the protesters were chanting, and we were, like, holding our line, and I just felt powerful in a way that I've never felt before. And I think you tap into that with team sports. That's why people like to watch sports. That's, like, why people like to keep track of, the individual players. But that goes into a million different things. Oh no, it's totally fine. I was like, did I just say that to everyone? And I imagine that happens to most people most of the time if you're ever in any kind of situation like that, whether it be a battle or combat or pitched battle in the street between protesters and riot police or any kind of situation like that. It's a very powerful feeling. Even just at a baseball game when you're chanting with a bunch of other people, it's you and 10,000 other voices. There's nothing like it. I don't know how to... Yes. And it's not that you just get to feel like you're part of the collective. You're, like, very much... You become a part of it. I feel like you get wrapped up in that moment. Yeah.
There's such a difference between person and people. And people are powerful.
I don't think I did a good job at explaining what that felt like.
No, but if you felt it, I know what you know what you mean.
Yeah.
Like, it's a tough thing to, it makes you believe in telepathy and groupthink.
And it changes. There are a couple of moments in that night that I actually revisit in my mind all the time because I distinctly remember having a couple of different conversations with police that night who were, like, yelling at us some instruction or something, and I had a whole group with me, so I'd walk right up to them and explain or yell right back at them why we weren't going to be doing that. And I don't typically have that much, like, normally I'll cross the street to avoid a cop because that's how much I don't want a problem, I don't normally have the gall to walk up to a officer of the law and tell them why we're not going to be doing anything of the kind. But when people get into those sorts of situations, something happens to your brain. We're pack animals, and I strongly believe there's things about us that we don't understand, and that's why these things happen the way they do.
One of us.
How somehow you can feel that power of all the people behind you, but I was just as weak as I ever was, right? Yeah, that cop could have picked up his nightstick and smacked me right in the face, and I wouldn't have been any more powerful than I was the day before.
That interaction, right? Like, no one is judging that interaction based on your physical ability versus his physical ability. It's his institution of police versus your institution of protest and mob.
In that situation, it's the cops versus the protesters. And I was like, as it happens, there's, sure, there's 50 NYPD here, but there's 1,000 protesters. So,
and you're both representing a force or a group much bigger than yourselves in that situation. You're embodying a whole movement.
I suppose maybe what I'm trying to talk on is how you so naturally embody it. How
easy it is to channel that, yeah.
Once I had that tiny semblance of authority, I was like no longer afraid of getting nightsticked in the face, which could totally happen. And there's no that wouldn't have even been prosecutable. Like, I couldn't have even done anything about it if I had been roughed up a little and thrown into jail, because it was a wild event.
You too are Spartacus.
We're all Spartacus. Kelsey, I was going to say before, yes, I did shave. Although I guess you don't really need me to help you. You don't really need me to confirm. I haven't seen my own face in like 5 years.
Like I say, we replaced Patrick.
I was curious. Oh, and Julia's never seen it. So she was
That's
actually
right.
Curious. She kind of pushed a little because she was like,
I want to know what you look like. Yeah.
Yeah. I was joking about it, and then she was curious. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it.
I mean, it's impossible to maintain like actual good haircuts. But yeah, I mean, I remember you definitely shaved a couple of times back in the day when I knew you.
I used to.
You used to shave pretty regularly.
Short, but I used to keep it like the length that you have your beard right now, probably.
Yeah.
I would shave it like a 2 or something.
Yeah. You'd buzz it down. You'd buzz it down and shave your head. All right. We all know you're cute. You can stop showing off for the camera.
Well, I was kind of looking at myself, but I guess it is still weird when I look at myself in the mirror. I still feel like I'm looking at a stranger.
Yeah, I imagine we'd get used to it faster than you would.
Probably.
Just because I have to look at you for like an hour at a time. And it's also, like I said, I remember you without hair. This isn't...
Yeah, for everyone else. Yeah.
God, you must have shaved when you got back from the PCT, right?
If I shaved when I came back or not. I remember that when I started, I was shaved. Like, I had a pretty close to the face shaved.
You did the whole thing where you started with nothing.
And then I didn't cut my hair. Yeah, and then I didn't shave at all until I guess I came back.
Because I remember seeing your beard get longer and longer. Did it just stay long when you got back? Is that why it's been so long since you shaved it?
I want to say yeah. So I remember part of the reason I wanted to grow it out that long is because I was like, here's a good opportunity to see what it looks like. I've always been curious what it would look like if I like really went crazy with it. And then I really liked it, so I kept it, I think. I don't think I ever cut it after that. Or not that I never cut it, but I never shaved it all off.
Right. Yeah, it definitely got trimmed, but
I trimmed it back.
I feel like that happens with a lot of kids where they like their dad has a beard when they're born and like yeah, a dad has a beard for 4 or 5 years and then you shave and like these little 5-year-olds have never seen their dad without a beard and he looks fucking weird. We had a headmaster in high school who shaved his mustache and it completely, I've never seen someone so changed by the lack of a mustache. Like totally didn't recognize him. It was very weird. So I still remember that. I also really like when 2 or 3-year-olds have twins for parents, and you see the video where they hand the child back and forth, and the kid like looks between the two dads. He like meets the brother for the first time. And is like, there's a great video where the baby's being handed back and forth, and they hand him to one dad, and he looks at them both and reaches for the other one. So they hand him back, and he looks at both and reaches for the other one because he keeps thinking like, wait, this isn't my my dad over there.
No. Put me back.
I wonder if that ever happens with pets. I feel like because they rely more on smell, maybe. But I feel like I've had a dog freak out because I put a hat on.
That's
so like I don't see Yeah.
You have beer for this session?
I did. I went out and got a 6-pack. I'm going to run out and grab a 6-pack, and I ran into one of my old bartenders, and he wanted to talk, and you know how it is. You run into somebody, and they want to talk, and it's like, it's hard. It's hard, because like, you don't get to talk to very many people. But at the same time, I was like, I got to go record here in a minute. Like, I get that you want to keep talking, but I got to prep. I got to do some stuff.
Yeah, I found myself talking to a barista in a coffee shop a couple of days ago for like way too long. Like I stood there and talked to him for like 5 minutes or something.
Right.
It's like, oh, I think I'm just excited to talk to anyone.
Well, then you feel bad because you're like, I shouldn't be standing here talking to people. Like, that's exactly the opposite behavior of what they recommend. Is like, if I need to go get coffee, I should go in, keep my fucking mouth shut, do as little as possible, and get out as quickly as possible.
Have you been out for coffee at all yet?
No.
I went by the other day. My favorite coffee shop is on my way from my apartment to my grocery store. So I saw it that they were open. I walked in. They have it so basically you're not allowed to touch anything. You can like walk in and say what you want, and they put it on the counter and you can take it. But you're not even allowed to touch the they touch any of the buttons on the iPad or anything.
I have been reading though that they're deciding that it's less contact and more breathing on people that seems to be spreading things.
Yeah.
That that's really less about surfaces and more about masks. Masks are really seem to be the right way to limit the spread more so than anything else.
Don't breathe moistly. Thank you, Kelsey. I was just happy to have really good coffee for the first time in 2 months. Like really good coffee, you know?
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't mind getting some espresso. I've been making pretty good French press coffee.
Coffee
like,
at home's
happy with
good,
my coffee quality.
but
yeah,
you know, the pros are pros.
Well, it's funny because last week we did the whole reveal thing. I'm like, yeah, Patrick shaved. I know that now, but a bunch of you weren't here, so of course you're seeing him for the first time, hairless.
I almost forgot to say
shaved
anything.
Monkey,
space monkey, sacrificing itself for the greater good. 30 pages in the paperback. This chapter is like 5% of the book. Maybe not quite, but almost.
There's quite a bit in this chapter, too. This is what I would call peak Jordan.
I actually really enjoyed this going through it, even though while I was reading it, I kind of thought of it as meandering and a little kind of plotting. There's a lot kind of happening in the background. I feel like there's just going to be a lot to talk about.
That's when I say peak Jordan, that's really what I mean, is like...
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, a.k.a. Peak Jordan, right? Meandering all over the place, but a shit ton going on in the background and very little going on in the foreground, which to me is what Jordan is just the master of, is giving you this sort of bland, nothing happening.
Yeah, Matt's not really doing a lot. He's walking.
Yeah, he's just
for
wandering
like
around.
Most of it.
Yeah.
But he makes some decisions. Happens upon Oliver for the first time, which is really exciting. I didn't realize that was happening.
We get a flashback to a Matt Rand meeting.
Yeah.
Which is a fun little get-together with them.
A little weird. Rand's getting creepy now. He's starting to get
Rand's
like
fucking nuts.
It's starting to get cringy to observe him through anyone's eyes other than his own now.
Yeah. I mean, he's off his rocker. He's winning, but he's crazy.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?
Is anyone anywhere?